It has finally happened, guys. I have German citizenship. I am finally holding my German passport, but what did it take to get here? And why did I get this when I already have this? And how do Germans feel about me having it? Hey guys, and welcome back to our channel. I am Donnie, and along with my wife Aubrey, we are two Americans. Wait, we are one American and one new German, currently living in Germany with our family, sharing all of our experiences living and traveling throughout Europe. I, as a German, also found that quite offensive. In 2019, we moved to Germany for a one-year adventure abroad, or at least at the time, that's what we thought we were doing. About 6 months in, COVID happened, and this was our way of experiencing German culture. So he decided to stay. We started to really like it here, so we stayed. I started a business here, so we stayed. We had children here, so we stayed. But we constantly debated how long we would stay before returning to our lives in the US because we thought this could never be permanent because of Germany's citizenship laws and our inability to get it without having to give up our American citizenship. Everything changed though 3 years into our one-year adventure when in November of 2022, the new coalition government led by Olaf Scholz announced that they wanted to rewrite German citizenship laws and allow multiple nationalities for all and reduce the amount of time required to live in Germany to get it. Suddenly, staying in Germany had a whole new purpose. After years of researching, experiencing, and sharing about German culture on this YouTube channel as my full-time job, becoming fluent in the language, joining community social clubs, and making German friend connections, getting German citizenship became an intense goal for me. However, I wasn't ignorant of the fact that not all Germans were happy about the proposed law changes. And in some people's opinion, they made it easier for foreigners to get a German passport and perhaps cheapening what it means to be a German citizen.
Sie setzen sich ein für eine Abkehr deutscher Lebensverhältnisse und für eine Entwertung der Staatsbürgerschaft. Das trifft auf unsere Kritik. Wir werden diesen Weg nicht mitmachen und uns mit aller Kraft entgegenstellen, liebe Kolleginnen und Kollegen.
So, how easy or hard was it for me to get this little red book? There are some main key requirements you must fulfill in order to get German citizenship through naturalization. Those are time living in Germany, German language skill level, financial stability, passing a citizenship test, and a clean criminal record. For time lived in Germany, previously you had to have lived in Germany for a minimum of 8 years, but the new law reduced that to 5 years. However, the new law also introduced a 3-year turbo citizenship option if you fulfill extra requirements. But it's actually being dismantled right now by the new government coalition, so it's basically irrelevant now. But this turbo path is where I learned that some laws are written very vaguely and in a way that leaves some things frustratingly very much open to interpretation and into something that gives a normally basic government employee significantly more power over you than you would expect. And sometimes a bigger head than they probably should have. By the time the new law came into effect, I had been living in Germany for about 4 years, and because I wasn't yet to the 5-year minimum, I thought that I would try my luck with the new 3-year fast track rule. Under this rule, you could apply for citizenship after only 3 years living in Germany, but you had to prove a minimum of C1 level German and that you were somehow specially integrated into German society. C1 is a hard, concrete threshold that nobody can argue. Either you have C1 German or you don't. But this special integration is interpreted very differently depending on where one is applying. In general, many offices interpret it as you are engaged in some sort of volunteer work and have a long history of doing so in your German community. Some interpret it as you have some sort of high achievements in your field of work. Again, somewhat vague, but maybe there are some achievements that most would agree is considered high. However, when I try to apply for this, my local authority told me that they interpret it as meaning you completed an Ausbildung in Germany. Now, for those of you who don't know what an Ausbildung is, it's basically a vocational training, like an apprenticeship perhaps. I have a bachelor's and a master's degree from the US, so I didn't do any kind of Ausbildung in Germany, but my naturalization officer was adamant that this was the only way to be specially integrated. In the end, passing the C1 exam like I did ended up being completely unnecessary, I guess, because I was now required to wait until 5 years to apply, and applying in the normal amount of time requires only a B1 level of German. And just for your information, the amount of people that actually have achieved the 3-year rule of citizenship was very rarely done. But again, in the end, this is going away anyway, so it doesn't really matter anymore. However, the 3-year turbo track isn't unique in it being up for interpretation, and in fact, a lot of the paperwork that I had to submit isn't standardized across the country. Rather, up to each specific local authority to decide what they want submitted. For my particular authority, I had to submit all of this. For example, everybody has to prove they are financially stable and won't become a burden on the state if given German citizenship, but what you have to show and provide is going to be different for nearly everybody, especially if you're self-employed like myself. For someone employed, it usually means just showing your most recent 3 pay slips and what contributions you have made into the German pension system. However, for me, I had to provide my business registration documents, 2 years of tax assessment notices, the previous most recent quarter's earnings from a tax accountant, proof of provisions for retirement, and any payments being made into the social security system in Germany. How much money did I have to prove we have or earn? I don't know. I still don't know. They never said. However, apparently, what I earn is enough. When I applied for my self-employed visa 5 years ago, the Ausländerbehörde told me that I had to show that I needed to be earning about 400 euro per person, plus whatever I need to cover rent and health insurance. So maybe it's about in that range also for citizenship. Literally all they said when I showed them my financial documents was, "Jo, das reicht." Of course, I also had to provide a filled out application, but another seemingly random requirement was a resume, which seemed odd considering I'm applying for a citizenship, not an occupation. Then I had to provide identification documents such as my current American passport, German residency permit, birth certificates, marriage certificate, proof of health insurance, registration documents for my city, and they also wanted to see a house rental contract. There were also certificates for 2 exams I had to take that I had to turn in. The language exam consisted of a written exam where I had to write essays in German, a multiple choice exam that focused a lot more on German grammar, and an oral exam which involved reading articles in German and giving presentation on them, as well as conversing with others as 2 graders watched us. The other exam that I had to take was a German citizenship exam. I have a whole video from a few years ago when I actually took this exam that goes much more in depth of the bizarre experience that was, but essentially the exam pulls 33 questions from a bank of 310 possible questions about German culture, history, and politics. I personally memorized all 310 questions, which resulted in a perfect score on the citizenship exam. And to be honest, the exam wasn't that difficult. I mean, after all, one of the questions is something like, what is an important part of a German Christmas? And the answer is a Christmas tree. So boom, give me a passport. I know how to celebrate Christmas. This must make me an Allman. But could any of my German viewers answer the question of who wrote the national anthem without looking it up? Throughout the process, I would also be randomly emailed asking for more and more quarters of income statements and other random documents they decided they wanted to see. It really was a moving target that I never seemed I could hit, but again, amounted to this much paperwork. Just like the paperwork and interpretations of the laws are different across Germany, the process of applying is also different. In some cities, you submit everything online. In some, you must have an in-person interview to submit your documents. In some cities, it's a combination of the 2. Or you could be like me and have 3 in-person interviews. In 2023, I had my first phone call where my naturalization officer did a quick check to see if I would be eligible to apply, and then sent me a list of documents I would need. That list ended up being incorrect anyways. In my first in-person interview, Aubrey had to come to sign off saying that she was okay with our children becoming German as well, and I had a mini test where they asked me questions like, who is the current chancellor? What are some basic human rights protected in the German Constitution? What happened under the Nazi regime that was so bad, and why is it so important that we remember what happened? Also, it should be noted, but it also should be obvious that everything I'm talking about is only done in German. Now, I say I needed 2 years of tax assessment documents. I was actually originally told I needed to bring 1, but then in my appointment, they said, actually, the rules changed. We need 2. And then I pressed asking why they didn't tell me this before my appointment so I could have brought it, but they just reveled in the joy they get out of making me dance like their little monkey. At least that's how I perceived it. In this meeting, we also discussed that in a few weeks, we were expecting our second son. So they told me what documents I would need to bring in order to add him to my application. So I had to set up another appointment to submit the corrected documents that they told me incorrectly and my son's documents once he was born. However, in this second meeting, they realized that they had told me all the wrong documents for my newborn to be naturalized with me, and I had to set up a third appointment to submit those corrected documents. Fortunately, 5 years of living in Germany gives you ample time to be well integrated, not specially integrated, into German bureaucracy, so this all was kind of expected. As you can imagine, with how well the paperwork was going, there was zero transparency about what to expect next in the process. I would email asking for updates every couple of months, and I would receive responses of, be patient. There seems to be a sweet spot of population and size of a city that may have a profound effect on the experience of applying for citizenship and how long it takes. If a city is massive like Berlin, you may have thousands of people applying, which may sound bad at first, but this does often mean that the city has motivation to either hire more workers and or modernize their process to accommodate the large numbers. Whereas if you live in a very small rural area like us, where only a little over 100 or so people naturalize a year, you would think they wouldn't have a large workload, so it should go smoothly and fast. But this could actually mean that they are understaffed and the process never gets modernized because they don't justify the need. However, there is a sweet spot where the population is big enough that they need to keep up with the applicants as efficiently as possible, but they also aren't overwhelmed. In some places, the wait is only a couple of months, with about 2.5 to 3 months being the absolute fastest I've seen someone receive their citizenship after applying, and in others, people are waiting for multiple years, with some being told at the time of applying to not expect to hear back about the process even starting for 2 years. For me, I was a bit fortunate in that it ended up taking only about 6 to 7 months until I received a letter in the mail saying I was approved, but to wait for another letter to tell me when I could actually pick up our citizenship certificates, and not to ask when this could be because, well, German bureaucracy, and they didn't know. A few weeks later, I received my invite to the citizenship ceremony. This consisted of our family showing up at 8:30 a.m., swearing a brief oath to Germany, giving up our residency permits, and then coming back for the actual ceremony at 10:30 in the morning. At the actual ceremony, there was music, some speeches, a long video about our county.
Gemeinsam mit der Stadt betreibt der Landkreis die ZAK, die Zentrale Abfallwirtschaft Kaiserslautern, eines der größten Abfallwirtschaftszentren im Südwesten.
And of course, the handing out of the citizenship certificates, and in that exact moment that you receive it is when you are officially a German citizen. We were there with our 7-month-old and 2-year-old, so as you can imagine, they got a little restless, so Aubrey had to step out to take care of our youngest, and it was in that moment that they decided to hand us our certificates. So unfortunately, we didn't get any pictures of the moment that we officially became Germans, but we did get a picture afterwards with a local politician who gave it to us. I also have to note that they had misspelled some of the information on my certificate, so I had to get a new one later made. In terms of how much did the German citizenship process cost? Well, to apply in total, I had to pay €357 for me and my 2 sons. However, there were a lot of other costs, like needing certified translations of birth and marriage certificates and American financial documents. There were also accountant fees for producing my quarterly tax statements that I had to submit, and then paying for passports and German ID cards. In the end, I estimate the total cost from applying to actually holding our German identification to be around €1,300 to €1,400 for all 3 of us. So the big questions: 1, how do Germans react to me having German citizenship? 2, why do I want to have it? And 3, was it hard to get? Well, the reactions have been mixed about me having it, to be honest. I would say overwhelmingly, everybody I've talked to has congratulated me and been very happy for me for receiving it. They all know how hard I've worked for it, and so they are very congratulatory. However, there has been a mixture of reactions when I say it. For example, there have been a lot of times where I say, I'm becoming a German, or I became a German. And I've had, for example, German friends who laugh as if like, no, you're not becoming a German. You'll never be German, but you will have a German passport, and that's awesome. But more of our, I would say, younger German friends would agree, yeah, you're becoming German, and they're very excited for me. But I've been shocked by how many people have asked that question of, if you already have an American passport, why would you want a German one? If you want a very in-depth analysis of this, plus hear the perspectives of a German who is getting American citizenship, check out the video I did with Feli from Germany. But a quick answer is, why not? It would allow me to be an active voice in the country I live in by being able to vote. It gives me more freedom of movement in the EU. For the rest of my life, I'm able to leave Germany and come back if, say, for example, we have a family emergency in the US and I don't want to have to do the visa process all over again in order to come back. It gives my children more possibilities for the rest of their lives to be able to more easily work and live in more parts of the world. And yes, the German passport is stronger than the American one. And finally, was it hard to get it? Meh. I made it harder on myself by exceeding the B1 requirements and getting C1, for example, but I wouldn't say it was necessarily hard, but I definitely wouldn't say it's easy. The bureaucracy itself is a massive challenge, and at times I told Aubrey, to be honest, trying to get German citizenship was kind of the first time that I was so frustrated with Germany that I kind of considered leaving. But in the end, my love for Germany overcame that frustration. But I do know people who have failed at getting approved for citizenship, so it certainly isn't easy. But I'll let me know in the comments based on what you've heard in this video. Do you think it sounds too easy, too hard, or just about right? To see who made it this far into the video, the random question of the week is... Willst du wissen, wie viel dein Auto wert ist? Thanks so much for watching this video, guys. Be sure to hit those like and subscribe buttons, and I will see you in my next video. Und wann nu German, living with our family. Und wann nu German, living with our family. Und wann nu German, living with our family in... Und wann nu family living... Und wann nu...